Yeah, thank you for everyone for joining us this afternoon. The Chair, Councillor John Cotton, the portfolio holder, is unavailable for this meeting due to an urgent meeting. He was advised of quite late yesterday afternoon, so he's asked me to chair today's meeting. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Councillor. Yeah. Thank you. I'm Councillor Majid Mahmood. I'm the cabinet member for Environment at Birmingham City Council. So I'll do the welcome introductions. The previous Environment and Energy Board meeting focused on the West Midlands Combined Authority Environment Programme. For this meeting, the main items will relate to energy programme, the exception being the opportunity for the board to provide input into the Air Quality Framework Implementation Plan ahead of its presentation at the November board meeting, which I believe is on the 17th of November. Item 2, apologies for absence. Do we have any other apologies, say, for Councillor John Cotton?
I have not received any other apologies.
Yeah, thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the meeting that was held on the 12th of July. I'm assuming you've all read the minutes of the last meeting. If you want to go through them, that's fine. If you've all read them, can we approve them?
Approved.
Great.
Brilliant, thank you. Item 5, Air Quality Framework and Action Plan. This is a summary document of the Air Quality Framework presented to the Environment and Energy Board in July. It is a more succinct document that prioritises the actions that will be taken to address poor quality and inequality of exposure across the West Midlands Combined Authority area over the next 2 years. The final version will contain a forward from both the Metro Mayor and the Street and Councillor John Cotton, the portfolio holder. The recommendations have been arrived through an extensive consultation process that has included 48 stakeholders, culminating in an event held on the 17th of August. All constituent local authorities have been involved in its production. It will also be considered by the TFW Member Engagement Group chaired by Councillor Ward and the West Midlands Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The recommendations in the paper are endorse the draft Air Quality Framework Implementation Plan for approval at the November meeting, and secondly, endorse this paper for presentation to the board in November, subject to any updates made by the Environment and Energy Board. So I'll open it up to the floor. If there's any comments, questions.
I've got a short presentation.
Yeah, if you want to go through the presentation, that'd be brilliant first. Thank you.
Work out how to share my screen, which we got working perfectly before and now won't seem to share.
Same gremlin that I've got.
Drag it across.
No.
I can just see like patterns and grey.
Yeah, that's my desktop. Ben, are you able? We tested this all out beforehand.
Oh, it's on.
Magic touch. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to take a really quick 5 minutes to run you through this, because at the July meeting we brought the full framework for those members of the board who were there. We ran you through the air quality framework that's been produced and gave you the background to that. So just to recap, we were asked to consider air quality and some of the implications for the West Midlands Combined Authority and some of the ways we might collaborate as a group of authorities that took us over and above the work that each individual constituent authority is doing and the work that Transport for West Midlands were already doing. That followed on from an options paper that had previously gone to the Combined Authority Board in 2021. The framework document that we brought to you, you'll remember, was a pretty lengthy document that had 143 actions within it. So what we've done, and the paper that's been sent out with the board paper this time round, is what we're calling a framework implementation plan. We did originally call it an air quality action plan, but that's what the local authorities had to produce, so the terminology would be quite confusing. So we called it a framework implementation plan, and that will really focus on what we want to do over the next couple of years. and starts to take forward some of the key aims that were in that longer form document that you had. So looking at the increased focus on particulate matter, looking at behaviour change across the region and consistency in campaigns, looking at some of the new actions that we might take forward, and as I said, increasing collaboration and innovation on air quality across the West Midlands. So the actions that we pulled out have been based on the evaluation we did as part of that framework that we presented to you back in July, but also the consultation work that we've been doing. So we've been working really hard with all the constituent local authorities, covering air quality, but also your public health and planning teams, because we know it's an issue that transcends just environmental health, and also taking action will require the involvement of those teams. Working obviously with Transport for West Midlands, particularly as the local transport plan is developed and making sure it's built into that, but also working with the Transport Support Group. Working with the University of Birmingham, they've previously presented to this board, the WMAIR team. Alex, who's been helping develop the framework and the action plan, is also commenters from WSP. So we've been pulling in expertise from WSP to support the framework development. We've engaged with a number of external organisations, so you can see those up there. And just this morning, we went to Transport Delivery Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the member engagement group that focuses on air quality, congestion and environmental impact. And they were supportive of the framework implementation plan with the recommendation that we actually suggest to the Combined Authority Board we develop a stretch target on air quality that takes us beyond that's in the Environment Act. So we went out to consultation on the framework and the action plan to make sure that the actions that were in there were not just what we thought, but took into account all of these organisations. Here we had 48 people come, representing 28 different organisations. And we've also worked with the Greener Together Citizens Panel, and they came and spoke about that work that they'd supported on air quality. And we'll look to continue working with them, particularly as we consider some of the measures that are in the action plan. In terms of the document that you've had with these papers, the shorter form document that will focus on the next couple of years, we've identified 9 priority work packages where we've bundled together a number of the different actions from the framework where there is complementarity between them, and we've come up with those 9. So looking at monitoring and digital engagement, particularly the rollout of low-cost sensors and how we make that data available. Looking at air quality communications, particularly consistency of messaging and how we can collaborate as a group of authorities in developing that. Looking at work with schools, looking at general air quality engagement and behaviour change, so a broader approach to change in behaviour, as well as a dedicated engagement and behaviour change package for domestic combustion, given that over a third of emissions, PM2.5 emissions, come from domestic combustion. Looking at some work that the WMAIR project has done, looking at the alignment between net zero and retrofit as we roll out the retrofit work, which you'll hear more about later in this meeting. Thinking about the role of planning, natural environment, and also thinking about research and some of the research strengths that we have in the region and how we can build on those. So in addition to those packages of measures, there are some standalone options because they're significant enough in themselves, and you'll see the transport measures have been pulled out as measures in their own right, and we particularly focused on some of those in the member engagement group earlier today. Just to make sure as well that we are aligned both strategically and in terms of governance, you'll see in the framework implementation plan that we've considered other strategies that align with the air quality framework or should influence it, as well as how the governance we're suggesting fits in with existing boards. So the main change is we're proposing to establish an air quality framework delivery group. Air quality is currently discussed mainly at the West Midlands Environmental Protection Group, but that group has a significant remit that goes beyond just air quality. And so from speaking to your officers at the constituent authorities, as well as other people that have been involved in the consultation, there seems to be appetite for establishing an air quality focused group that would have task and finish groups assigned to it, to really start to take forward the work and the actions that we've identified in the implementation plan. That will feed in both to the Environment and Energy Board, which will be one of the main routes into the Combined Authority Board, as well as through transport governance routes where that's appropriate, and where we're looking at transport actions through the framework implementation plan. And I think we covered this in the last meeting, but we've got some funding to start working on all of this, or a lot of this. So we've secured just under £1 million from DEFRA that will start to help us develop behaviour change work, as well as the monitoring and a website for showing the data, providing the data, and making sure it's transparent. And we're anticipating that there'll be some additional capital funding from DLUC to help us with that. And we've already started some engagement. I mentioned the Greener Together Citizens panel, but we've also run an air quality perceptions survey, so that we've got a starting point for some of the work we know we need to take forward. So really what I would like to ask this board is that you are happy with the framework implementation plan, to take any comments on that plan, and also the paper that we sent out as the covering paper for the framework implementation plan will be an adapted version of that, will be going to the Combined Authority Board, so to make sure that you're happy with how things are represented in that, or to take any additional comments.
Thank you, Jackie. I've not got any hands raised, but from perspective of Birmingham City Council, I know you've had a conversation with Steve Arnold about this, and the updated framework does focus on some small priorities, such as rollout of sensors, creation of the website, which does make good use of the DEFRA grant before it comes back to committee. And I think you're probably aware we've appointed an air quality policy manager to help coordinate the activities and inputs. I think they start on the 2nd of October, but that's all subject to the spend control board that we have. But once they are in position, they will be able to review and provide inputs once they start from a Birmingham perspective. So thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come in?
Yeah, Councillor Rob Clinton here, Cabinet Member for Climate Change, Dudley Council. One of the issues that I'm coming across with my officers, because I'm trying to roll out an air quality scheme and engine stop idling scheme around the schools, and I get like officers from the air quality team saying, oh, we can't measure it, so how can we enforce it? We can't measure it. Is there any way that we can either provide some equipment, more portable equipment, so officers, when they engage with schools, can actually monitor there and then the actual the nitrates and the particulates? You know, when you see all these TV programs of drug smuggling, they go through, they've got these snap things they can tell. When you're doing brewing, you can tell the sugar content and all this pretty easily. We need some equipment that is portable and can do the job there and then on site, if at all possible. Is there any equipment available?
Yeah, I mean, there are various different real-time monitors you can do. I suppose it's how to engage with that. I mean, that could be potentially one of the subjects of the DEFRA Behaviour Change project, if that's what your officers feel strongly about. I mean, it's a case of enforcement. The meeting this morning with the member engagement group highlighted some of the things where they had school streets where they were just disregarded because there wasn't the enforcement. So I think it's about both the educational programme and also communicating the data. So that could be through a mix of through the West Midlands network. If there are a set of roading sensors that could be used, obviously they would be indicative and lower cost, so they wouldn't be most accurate. But
it's basically Yeah, it's basically something that we need to reinforce behaviour change, right? Behaviour change with people sitting in the cars. You don't want confrontation, you don't want arguments and all that. But if you can go with a handheld device and you've got somebody idling the car, and then you can take a measurement of the air and you can show them, right? Like decibels, you can measure decibel levels, can't you? And if we can find some sort of equipment that can actually measure the quality and show people, right, it should be down here, but because you're idling, it's up here. Do you mind turning your engine off? Right, it's just some basic proof, really.
I can see where obviously the officers, it is a very difficult thing to measure, because unlike sound, you've got like you know roughly what your baseline decibel level is and you know what a car is. It's comparing the difference between the cars that were there before versus after, and sometimes if it's windy, it's raining.
Yeah, hello, am I back in again?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So it's just making sure that obviously anything that is implemented is well designed and does have some scientific backing.
Yeah.
But that's definitely something you can look at as a program, and that would integrate well with both the school's work package and the general engagement package. And one thing that needs to be reinforced is just the generic messages around air quality communication, as the WMA team estimate up to 2,300 people in the West Midlands died prematurely from long-term PM2.5 exposure. It's not deaths, it's mortality attributable to long-term particulate exposure, but that's a really difficult thing for the public to understand because it's an estimation. So it's all these things where if we can have a consistent messaging and a campaign that works well in Dudley, that can get rolled out. It's just getting that.
So to summarise on this end, basically, can we have something written in there then that emphasises the equipment that enables enforcement, right? And can we have an emphasis on maybe portable equipment as well?
Well, I'm not sure whether the implementation plan would have that level of detail, but we can allude to an example of a campaign that could be done to institute that. I think that's a bit further down the road where we would speak to the local authority officers, understand what is the target of your engagement programme, especially as the DEFRA 7 campaigns across each of the local authorities. It would form potentially part of that.
Okay, I'm going to be politically now. Basically, what will happen is you will have all this conversation, things will just go back and forward, and then it'll take how long to get a decision. Whereas if we can go in with the report with the decision already made, that just cuts all that out and it saves a lot of time. The issue for me is that we need some way of measuring, whether it's something that we put there over a week span or whether it's a handheld span. We need to be able to measure to enforce. If you can't measure anything with a quick turnaround, you know, we've got a problem of actually enforcement and actually trying to persuade people, because how they're going to believe you without the data. So again, mechanisms then for funding these things as well, or do we have a pool that we can actually draw from of the equipment from here as a central pool that we can, when we're doing campaigns, various authorities can come to you guys and say, look, we need this, that and the other, and you provide it in that way. I don't know.
I think the long-term aspect is going to be a lot more achievable. We can, of course, we can have like a roving sensor that's put up on a school. You track the data. I mean, these things, even if you have a package of measures, these things are really hard to sort of evaluate and see the impacts because you might not actually see anything. So it's very difficult, but you know, that we can, through the DEFRA funding, I think that mechanism is already in place for Dudley to suggest that.
Okay. One very last point. This is going from now to 25, but if you look at your report from 25, what we've had given to us is on the front page it says 0.5 million funding, and then when you go inside the document it says 0.9 million. So is it 0.9 or is it 0.5? That's something that you guys need to iron out because it's causing a bit of confusion.
So it's 0.9 from DEFRA, 0.5 from DLUC, but I'll make sure that it's consistent in the report.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Peter Hughes.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I've been having some problems with the volume and hearing. I've had to come in on the phone and the laptop. Just to say that in relation to a strategy and implementation plan, you know, and I'm all in favour of rolling out more monitoring and more community engagement. But with an overall strategy, it's whether there's a how can I say it, a fairness taking place into, and I'm particularly looking at the allocation of new electric buses. I know that the Coventry City Council now have a completely clean fleet, and what I'm being told is that the end result of that is that Sandwell is likely to end up with the, how can I say it, the dirty buses that are going to be discarded. Now, for all the strategies in the world that you might have, if that's the sort of thing that takes place at a operational level, that's not going to, you know, we've probably got some of the poorer air quality in the West Midlands in Sandwell, with the motorway network cutting right through it, to worsen this by deploying buses that are cast off from other parts of the combined authority area. Is that, you know, the strategy might as well be thrown in the bin, might it? And all we're going to be doing is monitoring air quality, which is worsening. So I'm just trying to make a point that you know, strategies and implementation plans are only as good as the actions that lie underneath. And I think there's got to be a fairer sort of approach to how we take transport in particular forward. It's just a point I'm making, and whether anybody's got. I mean, we're doing quite innovative projects in terms of monitoring with a FATE network air quality monitoring project that's I think into its about its third or fourth year, I think, and it's been very successful. But it doesn't help when we clog up the system by deploying buses over here which are going to worsen the pollution. I don't know whether anybody's got any responses to that.
Jackie, can you respond, please?
It's Jake Thrush here from Transport for West Midlands. Target's 2030 for all 2,000 or so buses in the West Midlands fleet to be zero emission. So if we can accelerate that, the faster the better. But I think we did a bid for the all electric city, and the size, the eligibility of it was that we could bid for Coventry for the whole of West Midlands. And so we've been successful with that. And I think what has happened is the cascade has been I think it's Euro 6 buses have gone to the other parts of the West Midlands, and the dirtier buses, less than Euro 6, have been disposed of. So obviously we're trying to get to zero emission buses as quickly as possible, but I think it's not, you know, the buses, it means there is some improvement actually, you know, and the dirtiest buses are the ones being just discarded in the approach.
Yeah, and just in terms of the question around the very light rail in Coventry, I know that's a lot cheaper. It's about 1/8 of the cost of your normal tram. But where's that funding? Is that funding direct from the Coventry Council? Is that supported by the combined authority?
Coventry Very Light Rail project is funded mostly through the Crusts Settlement Department for Transport grants. So it's, you know, it's very interesting research and development to see. Let's sort of develop this product and see how it goes, and potentially it's a much cheaper way of getting more light rail across the West Midlands and other urban areas.
Okay, Peter, your question's been answered. Yeah, I think he has. Okay, Councillor Craig Collingwood.
Sorry, yes, that's fine. Thanks. Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, Peter. Craig, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. Councillor Collingwood, Cabinet Member for Environment, Wolverhampton City Council. Yeah, it's just very briefly, and in conclusion on this particular paper, Chair, I just wanted to say that I'm aware that various departments within my authority have submitted comments on it, and I'm happy to support the recommendations on the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Craig. And I think in the interest of fairness, we did receive an email from Councillor Andrew. Forgive me for pronouncing his surname incorrect, but it's something like Makiewicz. And I'm just reading out his email, so it's not my thoughts, they're his. He says he's in broad support with a few comments on clean air. The key is to get the public on board and get individuals to make the correct decisions. For instance, use clean transport, buy electric cars, don't use wet wood in log burners. No one would smoke in front of children, but idling a car is okay. I think the clean air zone that penalise those who cannot afford new vans are wrong, and when assessing their impact, the readings outside the zone and beyond need to be compared. Monitoring equipment should be done across the West Midlands Combined Authority using a common framework. We should move to real-time monitoring. So that's from Councillor Andrew from Solihull, if those comments can be noted. Got no one else who's indicated they want to speak. So if we can endorse the draft quality framework implementation plan for approval at the next board meeting, and then endorse this paper for presentation to the board in November as well, subject to any updates that have been made through the comments and questions today. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Energy Capital update. We've got Cheryl Hiles, Director of Energy Capital, who will provide an overview of the work related to energy and energy efficiency across the combined area. She'll be joined by colleagues Kate Ashworth, Energy Infrastructure Lead, and George Sims, Smart Hub, who will give a more detailed update on specific parts of the programme. Are we going to go through the next three items together, then devolved retrofit funding, strategic partnerships for energy infrastructure, and the new regional energy systems plan and function, and how it relates to local area planning? I'll leave it to the officers to decide.
We are, Councillor Mahmood, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Carry on.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and great to see everybody. I'm Cheryl Hiles, Director of Energy Capital, so I'll just take you through this paper. As you'll see, there are a number of recommendations. To start with, it's to note the progress on the energy programme. We're 6 months into the programme since we last presented it to you. So I'll take you through a very quick summary. And if in going through that process you wish to identify any topics for us to bring back to future board meetings, please feel free to flag those as we go. And then my colleagues will join me to undertake 3 deep dives. So one of them is looking at our retrofit devolution deal. So my colleague George will take us through that, where we're asking you to endorse the principles of the retrofit devolution approach that we're taking. The second is to look at a strategic partnership concept that we've expanded to the energy sector from the housing sector. So it's about endorsing the expansion of that into energy. And my colleague Kate will talk you through that. And then finally, I'll just do a short update on policy, which is just some interesting moves afoot nationally where we've been influencing quite heavily. So I will close with that element. So just taking you through. Before we do go into details, I'd just like to say a couple of thank yous if I might, particularly if we could note thanks to Councillor Cotton, who was kind enough to come to our Energy Capital Partnership Conference on Thursday, and he did a fantastic speech opening the afternoon session, which really paved the way for some fantastic conversations and some really good ideas about what we want to be achieving in the West Midlands going forward. So this formed the beginning of the refresh of our regional energy strategy, which many of you will now know is 5 years old. So we are embarking on updating that. Then you'll kind of see how that fits into the wider programme of activity going forward as we move on. I also just wanted to note congratulations to Coventry City Council, who also announced last week the signing of their joint venture with E.ON as their strategic energy partner, which is the first of these sort of partnerships within the West Midlands. Very similar learning from that which some of you will have seen in Bristol, where there was a joint venture partnership established. It's moved. This is slightly different. It's a really exciting new way of doing things, but yeah, Coventry came along to our conference and spent a good half an hour explaining what they've been doing and taking questions from the floor, and there was lots of interest. So again, just wanted to note that partnership. So moving into the paper, hopefully you've all had a chance to work through it. As I set out at the beginning, there's a lot to our programme, and there's some slides at the end that sort of show the overall picture of how it all fits together. But there were 4 key priorities that we identified back in March that we wanted to try and progress. And I'll take you through each of those in turn. So the first was around local area energy planning, and using this to remove barriers to low carbon infrastructure investment across the whole of the region. Some areas have undertaken local energy planning outside the West Midlands already through innovation funding, but currently government still hasn't decided to fund local energy plans consistently across the UK. And one of the reasons for that is the cost of it. So we've been working closely with the energy system to see how we can extract funding through the energy system rather than through the taxpayers to try and get us to a point where we are able to utilise local energy planning, because we realise it's really, really important in terms of informing where infrastructure is invested in and whether we as the West Midlands have access to the sorts of pipes and wires that we need to be able to decarbonise and grow effectively. So we established a local area energy plan coordination group across all of the local authorities, and again I'd like to express my thanks to all the officers across the West Midlands who've participated in this. There's been a series of meetings over the summer, and we've had really great engagement. So we understand each local authority's perspective on local energy planning, what they want to achieve, how we might be able to move forward together. As a combined authority, we are taking a strategic approach, as you would expect. So trying to solve some of the basic foundations that are causing us difficulty, one obviously being money, but others are making sure that we have the data foundation to underpin local energy planning. It's a big cost in the process, and if we can do that ourselves, we can have constant access to that and make sure that it's kept up to date. That reduces the cost to the individual local authorities and partners when they're looking to develop the plans. So we entered into a partnership with our distribution network operator, who is National Grid Electricity Distribution, to put forward a funding application into what's known as the Strategic Fund with Ofgem, and have requested funding to build a digital tool that's already in existence, but to apply it to the West Midlands, and to work with them and the tool operator to be able to ask questions of the system. So to be able to ask it the sorts of questions that we want to know the answers to, like what if we decided to put our electrification of our bus depot here instead of here? What if we decided to put this plant over there? What if we decided to put these sorts of investment into this area? What would that do to the network? How would the network respond? Would it mean that we have cheaper grid connections, quicker grid connections? Would it mean that we can decarbonise faster? So some of those questions are built into this tool. And we have been successful in taking the funding from the discovery phase, which it was called, to the alpha phase, which is meaning that we get a good chunk of investment coming into the region to provide this data function that we will slowly be rolling out. We started building it in Coventry. We worked really closely with Coventry off the back of the Regional Energy System Operator project that we ran a few years ago. And we hope to be able to roll this out to the Black Country next. Because again, they've got a very good data foundation that we can put into this tool, which will allow access to everybody, all the different stakeholders who want to participate, but we can control that. So the local authorities can have complete control over what information is shared and how it is shared. So we're really excited that should move us a big step forward in local energy planning. Had we not got the funding for this, we were looking at other mechanisms, and we definitely need to work collectively as a region to pull together resource to be able to fund local energy planning going forward. But in the meantime, it's also still a lobbying point that I'll come back to later on, as we're working closely with government to identify how they want to move this forward and make sure it all adds up to the total that they are looking for nationally. In terms of our second retrofit priority, George, who's going to speak to you later, leads the team on retrofit, and is going to be talking to you about how we're moving towards our devolution deal. But one of the priorities over the first 6 months was to actually get some retrofit delivered. When we first started, we didn't have a very big team in this area. We were offering to work in areas where there wasn't the capacity within the local authorities to bring consortiums together to access funding the government was making available. So we were successful in accessing quite a lot of funding. Now we've been successful in delivering the first round of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Wave 1 project. So 513 properties have been retrofitted, and that brought an extra 14 million into the region to support retrofit. That's been a real learning curve, and it's been really useful in terms of supporting some of the partners who wouldn't have been able to access the SHDF funding otherwise. And it's also helped us to bid for a second wave for a much larger sum of money, over 52 million for the second wave of SHDF, and also supported us in being able to work with the Midlands Net Zero Hub and other partners to be able to deliver home upgrade grant funding that we have about 16 million that's been secured for the region. So in terms of delivery, we've been fairly successful in delivering what we hope to. There have been some challenges, lots of learning, but it's been given us the opportunity to build up our capacity within the team to be able to support going forward. And work very closely with our local authority colleagues who are doing the same across the region. All this is feeding into our devolution ask, which will hopefully mean in the future we won't be in a position where we're bidding for all this funding, but we're able to work with local authorities to allocate that funding rather than have to go through these short-term bidding processes. But I'll let George speak more about that later. That was priority 2. Priority 3 was around demonstrating our Net Zero Neighbourhoods programme as an effective mechanism to attract investment into local communities. So this is about, instead of looking at retrofit from a market perspective, it's about looking at it from a community perspective. And as you will hopefully remember, Dudley was appointed as the first Net Zero neighbourhood that was going to move forward, but we do have a cohort of neighbourhoods across all of the areas of the West Midlands. We have business plans that have been submitted and worked on collaboratively for each of the local authorities with their own net zero neighbourhoods. But we are in a position now that Dudley has appointed Equans as their delivery partner for the region's first net zero neighbourhood, and that the kick-off meeting is actually taking place now as we speak. So that at least we have been able to move forward. It's been a lot slower process than we'd hoped in relation to being able to go through local procurement exercises, etc. But we're in a good position now. The programme will start the community engagement, which is the key foundation to this work going forward. In the meantime, what we have been doing is going out and speaking to the investment community to get a good understanding of whether they feel that place-based models to delivering retrofit are something that they could invest in. The feedback has been really interesting. We've been able to develop a model that will take us through a kind of pilot demonstrator to a commercial phase. But at the moment, until some of the key areas are proven that we can actually capture the value that is modelled and we can show that to investors, they are a little apprehensive about investing in this sort of approach. And that's the case nationally when we've been speaking to other local authorities, other experts in this area. So the feedback we've had from communities, the investor community, is that we need to use the pilot to really demonstrate those core flows of finance so that they can see that the money would be recouped, which is obviously what they're looking for, but also that the value that we think that will come from taking a net zero neighbourhood approach can be recognised. So we've been working with funders who perhaps aren't interested in a financial return but are interested in the outcomes that we can produce, because that's another way of making sure that we have enough non-repayment capital within the model to ensure that we can achieve our objectives, and that we can bring in finance that does have a return require a return as well. So finally, just to flag in relation to this programme, the other area of work that's been going on whilst we've been waiting for the delivery programme to start is to get a monitoring and evaluation programme agreed across the cohort, and that's been developed based on our WMCA inclusive growth framework. So we've been able to use the principles of that to identify what monitoring and evaluation needs to take place in order to be able to inform our investor community and demonstrate the model. So a lot's been happening behind the scenes, and that we'll hopefully now start to see some direct community engagement taking place in Dudley. And then the final objective priority area was around lobbying government, Ofgem and National Grid to empower the West Midlands to actually be able to influence the energy system across the region. I'm not going to talk about that now, this is just a little taster, so I'll come back to that in the deep dive, where I'll explain how we've been working closely with those partners to influence the national energy system and give the region a voice. So if it's okay with you, Councillor Mahmood, I will now hand over to George, who can take us through a deep dive into retrofit.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. You okay to move the slide deck on, please?
Yeah, I'll keep driving if that's okay.
So, bit of context, what we're asking for today is to endorse the principles of retrofit devolution that we set out in the paper that will be used to guide the negotiations that we have with government, and also the detailed design of how the devolution settlement for retrofit looks like. So as you know, in March, the Trailblazer devolution deal was agreed with government, which provides provision for a pilot of devolved retrofit funding through a single settlement. And what that means is that we should, as a region, have much greater control and flexibility over funding, reduce the need for bidding, and allow funding to be better aligned with our existing programmes, whether that be on a neighbourhood level or better alignment with social landlords' existing home upgrade programmes. So it should allow us to do more, spend money better, and bring in more funding as a result. And now, well, it's brilliant that we've got that in the devolution deal. There's a lot of work still to be done to agree what exactly that looks like, how much funding we will agree with government, how that funding is calculated, how reporting governance work, how funding allocations work, what the outcomes of that funding look like. And so discussions are ongoing with government on those subjects, but you know, we don't want to wait too long. We want to be able to build consensus in the region around what a good outcome for us looks like, and therefore we've taken the opportunity to undertake some engagement with local authorities, both at officer level, but also feeding some of that back to senior officers as well. And so we put together some outline proposals with consultations ongoing. People, you know, you can still possible to sort of feed into this process. Nothing's really set in stone yet, but we've put together an outline for what we would like to aim for, what we'd like to push for, and yeah, generally, so there's lots of questions to resolve, but the feedback today from local authority officers, both at retrofit delivery level, but senior officer level, have been broadly supportive of what we've suggested. So on to the principles then, which are set out in the paper as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. We've put together 11 design aims really for what we want to get out of a single funding settlement, what we want it to do, how we want it to drive the development of the market for retrofit across the region, so that we can achieve the scale that's required to meet our 2041 targets, our individual climate change targets as local authorities as well. So first principle is we need to build and maintain capacity to develop and deliver retrofit projects through local authorities, combined authority itself, but also registered providers of social housing. So one of the longer term issues that we have is that because funding is quite stop-start, resourcing is quite stop-start as well. We're often finding that people are having to run projects, do bids and so on top of their normal day job. So it's something that we have to sort of squeeze in rather than being dedicated capacity. And I think that means we're not able to join up initiatives, have the sort of focus and clarity that I think we need to deliver good projects and target funding in the right places. We need to sort of work broadly to improving the investment case for retrofit so that we're reducing the reliance on grant funding. Grant funding will never cover what we need it to be, so we need to look at other sources of funding. The more we can demonstrate that there is a return, whether that's through energy bill savings or healthcare savings or whatever it might be, you know, selling the carbon, for example, selling the carbon savings, then there are other means of funding retrofit, and therefore we need to structure projects in a way that maximises the opportunity for those. So grant funding is really leverage to bring in additional investment and get to the scale that we need. Unless there's that sustainable demand where we're not reliant on grant funding, we won't achieve the scale required. We need to be able to use some of the funding to stimulate demand in the willing to pay market and overcome some of the barriers that we have amongst the sort of willing to pay market at the moment. There's very limited demand, even though people want to reduce their energy bills, want to make their homes more comfortable. Demand for retrofit is still quite low, and that's because of various barriers in the market, which have been discussed previously at board meetings. I won't go into detail now, but that's why we need innovation enabling funding as part of our funding settlement to try and overcome those and develop propositions that people will want to do. So we want people to want to do retrofit. We need to find ways of making it in people's interest to do so. We need to also find a way of balancing value for money, which will be one of government's main drivers, with some of the actions that are harder to fund. So some of the homes that might be harder to treat, some of the things like off-site manufacturing, where actually you need to spend quite a lot on the first 1,000 or so homes that you do, but then after that the costs should come down. How we fund that first 1,000, whether it's worth putting more funding in to have a longer term view on bringing costs down. Aligning with skills provision and support supply chain growth. That's something that's a sort of key thing we need to be able to predict where that demand is, what the forward pipeline of projects looks like, so that we can say, right, well, we need more people in external wall insulation, for example, or heat pump installers. So align that with a skilled provision. Quality of retrofit and customer satisfaction is absolutely essential. So that needs to be one of our main drivers. Absolutely essential to doing all of the other stuff to grow the market, bringing in more funding, driving in demand. And part of that is really about measuring real world performance. So that's the funding at the moment is based on paper outcomes, going from an EPC band D to an EPC band C, for example. But that's not really telling us much about how people are actually more comfortable in their homes, or are the installations actually working? Are people getting the most out of the work that's been done on their homes? So that's there to show what works, what provides best value, and also to improve confidence. And that's a really essential part also for the skills piece, because if you can't tell whether someone's doing a job well or not, you can't tell them how they need to do that job better, and it fits into sort of skills and competency more generally. Looking to deliver, achieve, measure wider benefits of retrofit beyond carbon and fuel savings, which are the current government drivers. So we also want to look at health, well-being, jobs. There's lots of different things that we can start to try and measure within our inclusive growth framework indicators, but also beyond that, there's a wider sort of set of indicators that we're developing that we might not want to be held account to immediately, but at least we want to measure. So that again, it's about proving the investment case so that we can bring in more funding. And finally, linking in the outcomes of the local area energy planning and place-based projects like net zero enablers as they develop, to help us plan more strategically. You know, we understand where energy infrastructure is going to go. We can understand what's possible in terms of retrofit. So, if we know heat networks are going to go to a certain place, does that mean we need to do less work on improving building fabric? Where there's areas of high electricity constraint, do we need to do more on retrofit and less on energy infrastructure upgrades, or do we need to do both? So it's just about understanding where investment need to be targeted really. So again, recap is that we're asking today for you to endorse those design aims, principles that we've developed and which have so far received positive feedback from local authority officers. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm up next, but I saw a question in the chat, George and Cheryl. Do you want to take questions as we go through, or do you want to carry on?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe we take that direct question because it's quite a succinct one that we can answer. So, George, a question about how the RSLs have been engaged. Is that okay, Councillor Murray?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Well, there's 3 questions. One's already been answered. Thank you, Kate. The second one was about whether you can distribute all the slides to all members of the board, which I don't see why you shouldn't. We've seen them, so you can email to us if that would be really helpful. And the third one is obviously about engagement with registered social landlords at a local authority or regional level from Councillor Peter Hughes.
Okay, so when we talk about registered social landlords, we mean registered providers of social housing, which covers local authorities with social housing, HOMOs and housing associations. So we've spoken directly to the local authorities. We've had relatively limited engagement with non-local authority social housing providers, so the housing associations so far, partly because it's at a relatively early stage. We will need to bring them in. We work with a number of housing associations through our SHGF programme already, so they're aware to some extent. We haven't brought them in formally or had a group engaging them on this yet. We're mainly talking to local authorities who are able to then represent the interests as well of the housing associations within the region.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to carry on then? Is it Cheryl or someone else?
Great, thank you. Yeah, if Kate takes this one. So we're now going to talk a little bit about what we're not calling strategic energy partnership. So apologies, that was the title that was put out at the beginning of the process when the paper was written. But regarding the use of memorandums of understanding to work collaboratively with the private sector to help us to deliver our objectives. So I'll hand over to Kate.
Thanks, Chair. If you can put the next slide up, just for a bit of context. So,
Do your microphone because I can't miss it.
that better?
George, you might need to switch yours off. There we go.
Thank you. Right, so just for a bit of context, the update on the energy infrastructure programme elements is all in the paper. But I think it's just kind of worth bearing in mind that this is going to be a really important, increasingly important element as we try and broker and trade off different energy infrastructure investment in our places as we go towards this net zero transition. It's going to be increasingly difficult as resources become constrained over the next 5 to 10 years. And we need to ensure that the energy infrastructure that is being invested in is being directed and targeted in the areas that is going to hold most value to us as citizens and businesses and produce most co-benefits as well. There are other things that investment will unlock. So we're very keen to identify areas where we need to target that. We're very keen to explore kind of mechanisms in terms of the kind of short-term unlocking that we can do now, as well as the kind of strategic bits, and then and also making sure that is then fed back into the kind of tools and the digital tools that we are developing in order to ensure that the long-term network is fit for the future as well. So where does that lead us? Ultimately, that leads us to a place where we need to utilise the data, the tools, the resources that we have within the public bodies to ensure the kind of democratic accountability of those investments are drawn in. But really importantly, we also need to work with private sector who are investing in this space already. We were made aware of the kind of the successful collaborations that the housing team have set up with various potential partners who are looking to kind of to invest in this space. Then you can work collaboratively with those partners to essentially to make sure that both your collective outcomes are achieved. And we looked then to see if we could apply that model in the energy space. So where we have got to is that we have we're looking at a memorandum of understanding with a partner. And in order to achieve some of the things that we just said, we're essentially trying to kind of overcome barriers to development and growth. We know this is going to be a real area of kind of economic growth opportunity. We want to ensure that the investment that is happening in the region already is, that is happening across the nation, is directed into the region. So we know, for example, that National Grid Electricity Distribution are investing up to £6 billion within their next investment period over the next 5 years. We want to ensure that that is targeted in the right place. We also want to demonstrate leadership and innovative thinking and have a channel to be able to kind of to roll that from innovation and into delivery. It's really important that that innovation isn't just a kind of small microcosm of what we're doing. We actually want to roll this out to business as usual, and we want to build mutually beneficial collaboration. In terms of that energy partner, where we see the memorandum of understanding, we have had to be really careful around this because there's lots of different models. And Cheryl alluded to earlier that Coventry have recently announced their joint venture partnership with E.ON, which is a fantastic legally binding partnership, which both parties can then be held to account to make sure they're delivering the projects that were identified, some of which were identified through the innovation project, such as the RESO project. This is not that. This is a memorandum of understanding, and it's a will to work together to direct the funding that is happening already. It's a will to work together to share resources, to ensure that we're applying the kind of best minds and kind of efforts into this space. And it's a framework that provides transparency to partners within that relationship as well. So it's an ambition that we would like to do with multiple partners, but we need to be clear on what our roles are within that. So if I move on to the next slide, then the first off of one of these memorandums of understanding with an energy partner, we have applied to SSE. Now you can ask, why SSE of all the potential partners, all the potential kind of co-signatories to this memorandum of understanding. There's a few unique aspects of SSE that we felt really positioned them well to be able to work with us, not least that they had the appetite to do this with us, and they put in a lot of work at their end to get it to this point. But more importantly, SSE are rare in terms of providing technology agnostic solutions. So when we look at energy infrastructure in the West Midlands, we're really clear that we do not want to favour one technology pathway over another. That's not our place to do that. What we need to ensure that the right technology pathway is right for place, and therefore we need to work with partners who are not commercially driven to look at only one solution to that problem. So SSE solutions can range from on-site generation and storage for heat networks and grid connectivity as well. So they're an independent distribution network operator. So it puts them in a pretty good place to be able to offer a really exciting range of potential problem-solving aspects to us. They also have massive ambition. So they have board approval to invest £46 billion in UK energy infrastructure. And the West Midlands wants to secure as much of that as possible. So that has gone up actually from the initial starting point, because they can see there's a huge potential for long-term investment in particularly in this region, as we demonstrate our own ambition to make sure that our networks are fit for the future. The SSE share WMCA's vision for a just and fair net zero transition. So we have talked long and hard about the social value aspects of this this investment and ensuring we get the co-benefits in the places that we make those investments, but also taking advantage of the economic growth opportunities. There's job creation, there's upskilling, and that those opportunities are applied fairly and we get the benefits from those as well. SSE are firmly focused on collaboration. So we know that this is a memorandum of understanding, and therefore, you know, we are, it's not exclusive, and we've already seen the kind of complementarity, if that's a word, between what we have been discussing with SSE and the more formal arrangement that Coventry have with E.ON. And there will be other partners in that mix as well. We're very keen to demonstrate that our role is leadership position, but it's one of convening, it's one around facilitation, it's one of enabling that investment to take place in the most effective way. And having a role within that, you know, is allows us to have a sense of cohesion around some of those projects as and when they come forward. So the last point is important, that they're realistic in terms of the work that we are doing together. We don't necessarily lead to kind of, you know, immediately kind of profitable and commercial outcomes. That what we're trying to do is come up with a more strategic delivery vision for the West Midlands, and it does not circumvent any procurement or governance procedures, as you know, rightly it shouldn't. So in terms of what it means and what the next steps are, then the next steps are to scope and agree input to identify solutions for some of our kind of really high priority areas. So there's a lot of work happening at the moment around potential investment zones, growth zones, levelling up zones. So there's some potential to kind of get going straight away into understanding what that energy infrastructure that would enable and unlock some of the barriers in those areas might look like. We have a governance structure already that will allow us to identify that some of those the kind of points of challenge, and then we can potentially use this resource to try and understand what some of those solutions might look like. And we're very keen to consult with local authority partners over the potential role of SSE. So we're very happy to share the memorandum of understanding itself, and we want to kind of reinforce that we understand some of these conversations are commercially sensitive, so we will work together to try and understand what's in the public domain, what's not in the public domain, and kind of work through that bit while still retaining the kind of benefit of getting some delivery capacity into those spaces. We want to try and identify the strategic priorities that would benefit from SSE's expertise, and we want to reflect that work back into the local area energy planning coordination group that Cheryl mentioned earlier, to ensure that those opportunities are kind of captured across the whole of the West Midlands region, and then ultimately is subject to looking at through the lens of the Net Zero Infrastructure Delivery Panel to ensure that we get that kind of cross-sector whole system design needed for each of those individual places. And I will pause there for breath if there's any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a question in the chat. It's pretty long-winded, but the gist of it is around the 46 billion SSE investment in infrastructure related to the 6 billion that NGED, or the monopoly local network infrastructure provider, are investing.
Yes, so Matthew Rhodes, thank you. They are, it's not the same money. So the National Grid electricity distribution is money that's committed, and it's money that's agreed by Ofgem that is going to be spent in the region. The 46 billion is going to be for solutions that connect to that network, which is being invested in at that level. So they are complementary in that respect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just from a BCC point of view, we've been involved in setting up the terms for the retrofit devolution. I think it's really important with the devolved funding for retrofit, as it overcomes our current funding challenges and supports the scaling up of retrofit by providing longer term funding certainty and greater flexibility, which is necessary in this current environment. We also support the programme pushing strategic partnerships. I know our route to Route to Zero team have presented to the City Partnership Board and are setting up a climate change engagement group to share CHG accounting best practice as well, which is really helpful. And thank you to the officers also at the Birmingham City Council who have been engaged in this programme, which I appreciate. Is there any other questions or comments? I think you tied them out with such a lengthy presentation, lots of really technical detail as well. But if you can send the slides to all members of the board, that would be appreciated. Councillor Peter Hughes did ask in the chat, and I fully endorse for that as well. There is a question actually we have had in writing, or it's a comment from Councillor Andrew Makowitz. Again, apologies for the incorrect pronunciation of the surname. He's just written, I'm just going to read it word for word. The electrical infrastructure is inhibiting renewables, and I encourage engagement with Western Power to remove blocks to generation. We have loads of buildings that could take solar panels if the grid will not pay for it. Do you have any comments on those two?
Yes. So
yeah,
I very much recognise that challenge around connection to the grid. We work really closely with National Grid Electricity Distribution, which is the new name for Western Power, in order to try and identify or overcome some of those barriers. If there's a timescale issue, there may be some things that can happen what we call almost behind the meter. So you can look to balance generation and demand where you don't necessarily need to have such a grid. You don't have to have such a demand on the grid itself. And there's very happy to work with individuals or areas if that's something that, and that's potentially something that we could use SSE to try and kind of overcome as well, utilise their technical expertise to start looking into some of these issues. And then longer term, we're also working with National Grid Electricity Distribution in terms of their forecasting to get them to invest their 6 billion or 7 billion, depending on whether that's kind of new connections or maintenance, to in order to build the grid to us, if that makes sense, so that we're unlocking future barriers as we try and connect renewables onto the grid. But very much recognise the challenge. If there's individual areas that he wants to bring to our attention that we can look to kind of to focus on, would really welcome that, and I'm happy to move forward on that.
Brilliant, thank you. I don't see any further hands for questions, so should we just move on to the recommendations then? We've got 4. Note the progress across the West Midlands Combined Authority Energy Programme. Endorse the principles of retrofit devolution that will be used to guide negotiations with government, set out below. Endorse the expansion of West Midlands Combined Authority strategic partnerships to include partnerships with energy infrastructure providers. And finally, identify topics for future updates of the Energy and Environment and Energy Board meetings. Is that all agreed?
Agreed.
Brilliant. Okay, the next item is it. Are we onto any other business?
Councillor Mahmood, I wondered whether it was okay just to take you through the policy change.
Oh yes, sorry. Yeah,
is that okay? It doesn't require any decisions. It's literally for information, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So just picking up on some of the points that Kate had made and taking it to the next step, we do need to lobby our energy system to get it changed sometimes, because it does act as a barrier to us. And one of the examples is that it used to cost a lot of money to connect to the electricity network when upgrades were required, but actually through lobbying of the networks and the regulator, we and others have worked together to get change in that space. So now the cost actually falls onto the network, not the next person in the queue, which is a real positive. But timescales can still be a massive barrier to us being able to connect to the network. So there's still more work to do to get the system functioning in a way that helps us, which is why we need this short-term work, and then feeding into how the networks actually do their business planning processes. But I just wanted to quickly tell you about a direction of travel in relation to Ofgem and some of their changing policies. So Ofgem have always been working from a very national perspective, and there's some of the current policy positions have been quite difficult for us. So they have competing interests across electricity, gas and heat networks weren't even regulated, or currently are not regulated. But we're seeing through some heavy lobbying that we and others have been doing a move away from those individual interests to the energy system, recognising that they need to look at planning from a whole systems perspective, which is hugely valuable to us as a place, where we start to see how the different elements interact with each other. And that includes our built environment and our transport environment that also needs to interact with the electricity, gas and heat networks. We've also previously seen very closed business planning processes. I know some of the councillors have had the delight of me talking about things like RIIO-2 and them not necessarily knowing what on earth I'm on about. And these are the business planning processes that the networks go through, so our National Grid and our gas networks go through to decide where they're going to invest, and they're driven by how Ofgem tell them to do their business planning process. But they've now again are moving to a more transparent approach where they want to see some democratic accountability within the process of decision making as to where investment goes, and that is something that they don't know how to do. So they're coming to us as mayoral authorities to help them work out how we might be able to hold them to account for the investment decisions that they make into our region. And if you think about it from the perspective that a lot of offshore developments taking place, and there's a lot of network investment needed to bring that offshore energy to the major towns and cities, actually in terms of how our network is invested in, that's not necessarily always going to be at their top priority. So we have to really fight the cause for the West Midlands to be heard in this sort of space. So that transparency will be really valuable to us. They've also had a problem with grid connections and a lack of options being available. So we know that if there's a barrier to connecting our green energy, then we can't do much about it. But actually government's recognising that Ofgem need to change their behaviour to enable the decarbonisation process, and that means lots of little generation as well as the big scale generation. And this really significant shift from a very centralised focus to actually recognising that places have needs and that they need to be coordinated within a kind of overall process rather than just being told what's going to happen to us. So you will hear this new term bandied around, the regional system planner. I'm not going to go into detail of what that is, but just to say that Ofgem have done their call for input. They've gone through a consultation process, and we have fed in significantly to this through all of the learning we gathered through the Regional Energy Systems Operator project we did with Coventry. That's provided a huge amount of evidence necessary to showcase why a regional system planner could be really valuable, not just to us as a place, but to the national energy system as a whole. The decision as to how they are minded to proceed is expected in early November, and it's all indications that they are going to be supporting the move towards a regional system planner model. At the moment, it's expected that's going to be still done by what's known as the Future Systems Operator. So it's currently National Grid's electricity system operator. So it's still going to be a national body that does this process and works with places to make this happen. So there's a lot of work we need to do to make sure that they get it right and they do it how we want them to do it. So bringing in the regional understanding, the democratic accountability, the data, all of those things are really important. So I flagged up this structure earlier, which is which is our new governance structure essentially, and within that you'll see a couple of things that are really important. The two orange boxes, which are the Net Zero Infrastructure Delivery Panel and the Local Energy Plan Coordination Group. So we've mentioned the Local Energy Plan Coordination Group, which is where all the local authorities are working together on the data and the information that then is fed into the place where at the moment the decisions are made, because they're made by lots of individual investors. So National Grid, Cadent, your heat network operators, they all make those decisions about where they're going to invest and do their own current business planning processes. But under a new regional system planner, that would happen in a different entity run by the Future Systems Operator. So we are setting this governance structure up to make sure that we're feeding all the right information in, and we are working really closely with Ofgem to essentially agree some kind of mechanism for us to have influence over that regional system planner board. So I literally met with Andy Street and Jonathan Brearley, the Chief Executive of Ofgem, this morning, where we agreed that we want to be taking a lead role in this going forward. The mayors are all convening a meeting with Ofgem at the end of November, and we're feeding in their thoughts as to how we can do that. But Andy has made it very plain that we would like to continue to lead in this space and work on a pilot programme with them to deliver. So finally, just to say, these are some of the representatives on that Net Zero Infrastructure Delivery Panel. They're all people who are investing in infrastructure, in terms of the top group of people. Then through the local area plan coordination group, we have 2 representatives that sit on this group. One is from Coventry City Council and the other from Wolverhampton. We also need to establish our customer groups to feed in. So where we've got where we have representatives from different areas of the sectors, we need to feed those in. I'm delighted that Ravi Gurumurthy, who's the Chief Exec of Nesta, has offered to chair the Net Zero Infrastructure Delivery Panel while we establish it as a pilot for the first 12 months working with Ofgem. And Ofgem are a key part of this panel and will be working with us going forward. So I think we've gone from a point where Ofgem weren't really in a position to be able to hear what we were saying because they weren't structured in a way where they listened to places, to a point now where I think we are fully embedded in their decision-making processes for the future, and it feels like we have a really strong voice in that process now. So I just wanted to flag that because you will hear me wittering about region system planners going forward, and we just wanted to make sure you were all aware of what those were and how we managed to influence them coming to the forefront. That's all I wanted to say, Councillor Mahmood, if that's okay.
Thank you. How come South Staffordshire Water, because I know they supply to properties in Sutton, Caulfield and Walsall, they're not on the panel? Is that because they've chosen not to be on the panel? Have they not been engaged?
No, so the water companies are they're an interesting one. We've engaged Severn Trent as a kind of the major supplier for this area, just to get their views, I suppose. So they're obviously not an energy infrastructure provider, but they are a big provider of renewable energy into the system, and they're a regulated industry who are very used to working in this kind of way. So we haven't got everybody around the table. The idea is to try and keep it fairly small. The key people we need around the table are those who make the investments into energy infrastructure, and then we have sort of representatives around the table, but that can change, and we can certainly involve others if you think there are people missing. So we're just keen to keep it as quite a tight group because it's quite difficult to manage at this stage.
Okay, yeah, there was a question from Councillor Peter Hughes, but I think Kate has responded to him in the chat. I don't see any further hands on this item, so thank you for that, Cheryl, much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Someone's indicated they want to speak. God, Councillor Craig Collingswood, do you want to come through, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it was very, very quickly, and just generally speaking, I just wondered what the officers thought about this in terms of the prominence and priority. Renewables needs to be much greater to decarbonise at pace. I just wondered, what will be done to accelerate the rollout of renewables, and there seemed to be very little reference to renewable energy in the presentation, in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a really important point. So renewables are making up the kind of foundation of the transition. In terms of the opportunities that are available to the West Midlands area, large scale renewable energy opportunities are fairly limited. So we tend to wrap our discussion of renewables up into when we're talking about the energy system and a smarter system, what we essentially mean by that is building integrated renewables. We mean co-located renewable schemes next to where the demand is, because that tends to be the best economics. So if you can imagine, if you can choose anywhere to put your renewable generation, you'll put it somewhere where the costs are fairly low. And feed into the network. We don't have a great deal of opportunity for that, so we need to put it where the demand is and match those supply and demand, and also use storage when we can to make sure that the demand profiles are matched by the supply. especially when we have network constraints. So one of the reasons for working with SSE is that they are a huge provider of renewable energy investment as well. So it gives us a key opportunity to identify where there's opportunities to invest and bring them along, because it's up to the market to bring that renewable energy investment forward. So ultimately it is economic, so it's about us removing barriers rather than actually undertaking the investment ourselves. But Kate, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, absolutely what Cheryl just said. The other thing that we're trying to do is around mapping and where those opportunities are. So we're undertaking a project at the moment with Midlands Net Zero Hub, looking at mapping of non-domestic, so the kind of potentially larger scale solar opportunities across the whole of West Midlands region. We're doing that in conjunction with CSE. So there's lots to be done. There's lots we can do, but I think we speak to quite a few businesses who say we would have gone for solar, but we've been told that we can't because of grid. So there's multiple fronts that we're working on that on.
That answered your question, Craig?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks to the officers as well for the answer.
Thank you. And Kate and Peter, Councillor Peter Hughes, will be having a conversation outside of this meeting. It's fine as well. Thank you, Cheryl. Much appreciated, and Kate and all the other presenters. Next item, I believe, is any other business. Unless I'm mistaken, that's the agenda that I have in front of me. Is there any other business? Anyone got anything to add? No comments. And I found out about my issue with the camera. It's the software package needs to be renewed at the City Council. So I need to go to the spend control to get it renewed. Thank you, everyone. And we've finished with ample time left. Again, apologies for not being able to have the camera working, but it will be fixed for the next meeting. Thank you to the officers and all the members as well. And if those slides can be emailed to members, that would be really appreciated. Thank you again. Have a good day.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.